Thank you, Minister. Recognizing member for Saanich North and the Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I want to acknowledge that I stand in this House on the territory of my Straits Salish relatives, who are now known as the Songhees and the Esquimalt. I'm honored to be able to work in their beautiful territory each day. And today, my act of reconciliation is to share an important story of and the support for this legislation, Bill 16, the Protected Areas of British Columbia Amendment Act. Second, I want to acknowledge the ÇÁÄL leadership, the elders, the youth who are here today to witness this debate. It is a good day. ÇÁÄL's ÁÄEL. In the beginning, it was the ÇÁÄL's teaching to look after Mother Earth. All the animals, the birds, the trees, the salmon, the wind were and still are people. For many years, the people remembered the words of the Creator, ÇÁÄL's, and there was a long period of happiness and plentiful food. But they began to forget those teachings. The Creator's feelings were hurt that the people forgot His good teachings. So the Creator told the people that a great flood would come and said, "Go prepare yourselves." The people prepared a cedar rope and gathered their food and all of their possessions. The tide waters began to rise. The people loaded all of their belongings into their canoes. Some people did not heed ÇÁÄL's teachings. They were not prepared and they were washed away. Their canoes were destroyed. The water rose higher and higher, and the people paddled to the highest mountain nearby, and the trees were still above the water. They tied themselves to an arbutus tree at the top of the mountain. Soon the tops of the trees were covered by the water. They were afraid, and they prayed that they would survive the great flood. They asked ÇÁÄL's to take pity on them. After many days, a crow came and landed on the bow of the canoe. He was carrying a stick and was talking to the people. The crow had brought good news. Suddenly, a mountain began to emerge in the distance. One of the men said, "Nikwanati Saanich." Translated, it means, "Look what is emerging." He pointed to the mountain emerging in the distance. Before they left the mountain, they gathered around a huge coil of cedar rope and gave thanks and said, "From now on, this mountain will be known as ÞÁÄU WELÂNEW, the place of refuge." And they also said, "We will be known as ÇÁÄL, the emerging people." ÇÁÄL's heard their prayers. He said he would not take pity, that he would not punish the people again by flood. The people were saved. They are now known as the ÇÁÄL people. This is the story of our sacred mountain, the origins of how we became known as ÇÁÄL. And we are still emerging today, as is evidenced by the beautiful faces sitting in the gallery today. This story of the ÇÁÄL is just another story, a beautiful story of the success in our territory. Just as the ancient story of the great flood, which has been carried by our ancestors, our ÇÁÄL, and passed to our youth, it was not the last time that the ÇÁÄL people were nearly drowned. There is a more recent story. These experiences are closer to the surface, and the scars still mark many of our people's skin. It's not an old story. Only about 160 years ago, a colonial flood of settlers came into the surrounding waters and onto these lands. In those first decades, school was not something to be remembered. School was something to be feared. Despite the memories burned into the mind of our elders, the stories they carry became an embarrassing reminder of the cruel and despicable decisions that can be made in houses just like this one by members of these houses. While we would prefer to believe that this is our past, it is indeed still, unfortunately, our present. But in the 1970s, our late elders, Philip Paul and Marie Cooper, and many of our other grandmothers came together because they did not want their experience of school to be the experience of their grandchildren. They wanted a different future for generations to come. From those meetings, the Saanich Indian School Board was born. The goal was to build an institution that would provide our youth with a Western education in a safe and culturally appropriate environment. If you consider the brutality that they and their parents experienced in school, this was really quite remarkable. But they knew that the floodwaters were rising and they must tie their ropes to the quickly disappearing trees before it was too late. The federal government policies that in many respects still divide us today, those same policies that have Indigenous communities fighting over the crumbs that have fallen from the Crown's table, jealously guarding small scraps while overlooking the opportunity that unity brings. Those deliberate policies were set aside by the Pakchin, ÇÁÄL, Þ�ÁU WELÂNEW, those leaders that came together to create the Saanich Indian School Board. And to this day, it remains the one institution that has truly united the ﷺEH people on the Saanich Peninsula. And it's indeed a model that we should be aggressively seeking to replicate in all aspects of our governance if we are to truly still be and continue to be the emerging people. As the school campus evolved and a new facility built in the 1980s and 1990s, our ﷺEH elders began talking about what the name of the school will be. What will we call it? I heard a story about that time. My family members and many other families were involved in this discussion. Ray Sam suggested that they should use the name Þ�ÁU, and the others thought that it might be better for it to carry a different name. Some said that the name Þ�ÁU is already used. It's the name of the sacred mountain. Þ�ÁU is the place of refuge, and it got its name from the time of the Great Flood. But perhaps that is exactly why they should use the name Þ�ÁU. Our people were experiencing a new flood, a new social and cultural deluge, and they were becoming overwhelmed by floodwaters. And this school was to be Þ�ÁU, a place of refuge for our children, for our culture, for our language, for our teachings, for our beautiful way of life. After a long discussion about the name of a school, it was finally settled. It would be known as Þ�ÁU. It's important to understand the significance of names to the ﷺEH. They carry with them a tremendous amount of historical information. When you are honored with a name, and it is bestowed upon you, you carry a responsibility to carry that name forward honorably. Naming ceremonies are powerful public events where families unveil their most sacred rituals and call on the most influential members of the communities to witness the events. Names are not to be used without the proper authority, and to misuse a name comes with tremendous shame. The discussion about names in the ﷺEH culture is the defining moment for a ﷺEH person. It determines our social status, responsibility, and roles. Life would be substantially different and difficult for a child whose parents passed away before they had received their name. When the elders in your family gather to determine your name, they are, in a sense, breathing life into you. This example of the naming of a mountain and a school is an indication that there's little difference of the import on the names of places and people. In many instances, they are the same, and they highlight a sense of a family or individual belonging to a certain place. They also describe the place, the resources, the characteristics of a place, so that when you got there, you knew that you were there. For example, Sneakwith. It means the place of the blue grouse. I share this to illustrate the substance of these actions today. One line in one bill jammed between question period and lunch on an average Thursday in early May. It may be easy to overlook this as just another act, in just another bill. on just another day. Indeed, many of our colleagues will stand without even knowing the deep meaning of an importance of this action. When I stood before the break weeks to talk about the territorial acknowledgements and asked the members of this House to consider them not as a duty or to read them as a prepared script, but to rather as an act of reconciliation and to provide the detail of what you are doing in your life to live your words. This here today is a powerful example of that. So, in a sacred naming ceremony, they brought the name down from the mountain, our place of refuge, Þ�ÁU, and put it on the school, a place of refuge from a new existential threat, Þ�ÁU. About a year ago, I was called to Þ�ÁU. Miss Melanie Nielsen's grade 3 class invited me to the school to present me with a petition. The students visited their sacred mountain and were appalled to see the signage. It had another name. John Dean Provincial Park, they read. They were sad that the name of the sacred place that saved their ancestors, Þ�ÁU, was missing, and they wanted that to change. So they put together a petition of the names of the students in the school, 174 in total. They were joined by 175 signatures from the students at Cordova Bay Elementary, a petition from those students standing with them in solidarity. They provided handwritten letters to the minister and asked me to lobby the government to change the name back to Þ�ÁU. And they did what every powerful group of advocates do. They called the media. I promised them that I would do what I could. And thankfully, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy was willing to complete the work. So today I stand to tell the story of our sacred mountain, Þ�ÁU, the place of refuge. And just as that mountain saved our ancestors and gave us our name and identity as the emerging people, my work here today is to honor the effort of our beautiful children who have not forgotten their teachings. Today they're Þ�ÁU WELÂNEW, who are here with us in this room today. They will be smiling with pride as their children and grandchildren have reminded us all of what it means to live in a good way. And to our elders who debated whether or not the name of our school, the school that is now restoring our language and revitalizing our culture, should be called Þ�ÁU, I believe today will be a day that we can all agree that that was a good decision. So I look to the children and their teachers who are with us in the gallery, and on behalf of our leadership, our community members, and our ancestors, I'm humbled by you. I'm excited about our future. And I raise my hands to you. ዄCA CM. ՀYCA CM. Finally, not yet. That was the first time that's happened. Finally, I'd like to say that the name of the mountain on the Saanich Peninsula has never changed. But for a brief time, we've called it John Dean Provincial Park, or Mount Newton. At the recent signage around the park and all the maps of the place have identified it as with these names, but it's always carried the name Þ�ÁU. The people who've lived for generations at the base of that mountain and have shared the original story of the Great Flood, but never forgot the day of deliverance from inundation, reminded of the reward for remembering the teachings of moderation, connection, and collaboration, so that I may be able to stand in this place and recite those ancient narratives so that we may be able to live in a good way. To those people, the mountain still carries the name Þ�ÁU. So I'm pleased that the government, and more specifically the minister, heard the call and has officially moved to recognize the sacred significance of Þ�ÁU by adding it to the name of the provincial park, and I will, of course, be supporting Bill 16, the Protected Areas Act of British Columbia. ＨYCA CM. Thank you.